Moving on to the next speaker, we have the honourable member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The father of 20th century modern management, Peter F. Drucker, once said, "There's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all." That quote depicts the foundation of the Just Transition Act that we have before us today. There's nothing just about forcing a transition on an industry or on a community that have made it their life's journey to produce the cleanest energy products that the world has ever seen, especially knowing that through global turmoil, food insecurity, and increased energy demands, that the world hydrocarbons will continue to be needed as a solution to humanity's woes, not as ideologists would have us believe as the case and the cause of those woes. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that, should the world decide that their energy demands will be satisfied by strong environmental hydrocarbon-producing countries, we as Canadians will continue to be there to answer the call. But, Mr. Speaker, we will not be there if Canada's major economic driver is brought to its knees by the twisted ideology of this government and its anti-energy partners. Our Conservative leader has said that we will unleash the growth within our economy, that with our most powerful resources produced in the most environmentally positive way, there will be benefits to our people and to the environment at the same time. We will not follow this Prime Minister with the help of his NDP masters to push production out of Canada and thus towards other countries where they pollute more, where they burn more coal, and where they put more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere with no remorse. Yes, this Prime Minister would sooner drive production away from Canadians who already have the cleanest electricity grid on planet Earth. It would go towards other nations who frankly are incapable of change or just don't care. Mr. Speaker, by using the wealth generated by our essential hydrocarbon resources, we can protect the environment, prevent billions of dollars of stranded assets owned by provinces and First Nations, and use our innovative skills to move the global needle of greenhouse gas to levels that would satisfy all but the most radical eco-activists. Mr. Speaker, on Natural Resources Committee, we've had much debate on the future of Canada's hydrocarbon industries. I find it unbelievable that a Natural Resources Minister and his cohorts in Cabinet would actively pursue a framework to handcuff one of Canada's greatest assets. Of course, Mr. Speaker, all of this discussion has been created because of the planned attack on resource development in Canada. Had Bill C-69, the anti-resources development laws, never happened, if tens of billions of investment plans had not been shelved, then the government would not have had to produce legislation to prop up the ghost towns that they are actively creating. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Just Transition Action Plan is a dangerous government-mandated plan to kill off 170,000 Canadian jobs and to put at risk the livelihood of 2.7 million Canadian workers. This is a plan, Mr. Speaker, that creates subsidized jobs, not sustainable jobs. Mr. Speaker, Conservatives do not believe in a central planning, Ottawa knows best approach that tells private sector energy companies how to run their operations. This government can't even track emissions properly. Mr. Speaker, one thing as a member of Natural Resources Committee that I've asked multiple times is an analysis of the full lifestyle impact of all projects that we have, from the first shovel in the ground to the last shovel used to cover up those projects. The government has no clue, yet we are to trust them to dictate to industry how to best run their operations? I think not. Mr. Speaker, oil and gas are still Canada's largest export sector, and it's so important in the development of the renewable and alternative fuels of the future to have it strong and to keep it strong. The Liberals and their NDP cohorts are ignoring cost, technology, and infrastructure demands. Mr. Speaker, reports vary on how the federal government has underfunded their climate plans. RBC had a report that stated that the government needed to spend $2 trillion to make it to net zero. They published a supplementary report saying Canada could capitalize on the global increase for oil and gas and still meet its net zero targets with investments from the profits. But this government turns its back on our allies while peddling technology and alternative fuel sources that cannot be produced at a commercial rate. Mr. Speaker, a Conservative government would unleash the energy sector while fostering technology and innovation to protect our environment so that more Canadian energy would get to the world to displace dictator energy and create jobs and powerful paychecks for Canadians. So let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing just about this transition and tax plan of these Liberals. Chief Dave Swampy had said that there's nothing fair or equitable about what is happening today. After 8 years of anti-energy messages, delays, arbitrary and inconsistent regulatory conditions, and an outright veto of an approved export pipeline and the imposition of project-killing Bill C-69, despite universal provincial opposition, the Liberals have made no secret of their intention to accelerate the phase-out of oil and gas in Canada. It's sad, Mr. Speaker. First Nation communities are begging this government to get out of the way and let them produce the resources on their land so their communities can thrive. Our global allies are begging for our help to get off Putin's oil so they can have a stable and ethical energy source. All the while, this government believes that if it can't be produced, then it can't be shipped, and therefore their ideological push will win. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that everyone loses, but the government is too self-absorbed to see that. Mr. Speaker, Canada should be the world's go-to energy producer and supplier of choice, and be the energy secure and self-sufficient here as well. Instead, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals put ideology and partisanship above reality and the economy. Politicians should be honest about the outcomes of their policies. Too often with these Liberals, we see them fall back on wordsmithing and they absolve themselves of any negative socioeconomic consequences of this so-called just transition concept for Canada. And this needs to stop. Many times we hear about how the world is changing and how important it is for us to keep up with our European partners. Then they should perhaps be paying attention to what is happening in Europe, because the mood has changed. Governments in Europe are starting to recognize the consequences of this blind action. They are listening to their people. That is the problem here. We do not have a government that is prepared to vary in any way from the path that they have set forward. They are not listening to their people. Here, it's understandable that they don't listen to opposition parties, but they had best be listening to the people in their ridings, because the mood has changed, and it is important that we recognize that, all parliamentarians here, because if we don't, we will be left behind by a world that is looking for Canadian energy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.